Cirincione.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Thank you, audience, and thank you, Felicia, for the warm welcome. As you can tell from the title of my books, I write romance novels. It's a grim business I'm engaged in, and I have been for almost 40 years now. But I am eternally optimistic, and I hope to share with you tonight some of the bad news, but also some of the rays of hope that we might have. It's tough times today, and this is a tough topic. You're talking about, just from listening to Jonathan, and I'm looking forward, Jonathan, to our discussion, because I want to ask you some questions about countering weapons of mass destruction and the kinds of work that you do. You could have somebody up here talking about these issues. You could have 10 different speakers, and they might take 10 different facets on this. It's a very complicated subject, but I'm hoping to give you an overview, to give you a sort of a global picture of what the kinds of threats are that we're facing, and what is, I don't know what likely, what may happen in the future. I'm sort of out of the likely business. I'm out of the prediction business. I thought Hillary Clinton was going to win in a landslide. I thought the Washington Nationals didn't have a chance. So you got to be very cautious. As Yogi Berra says, it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. So I am very careful about saying this will happen or this is likely to happen. But what we can do is look at the data, look at the information, and form some educated guesses. And I'm really surprised so many of you are here tonight. And I want to thank you for taking an hour and a half out of your lives to come here, because I know we have lots of challenges in our lives. There are lots of issues we face in our family, in our city, in our state. But of all these challenges we face, for me, there's really only two that threaten destruction on a planetary scale. And that's the climate crisis and the nuclear crisis. Climate change can threaten human civilization over the decades. Nuclear weapons can end human civilization in an afternoon. And the climate crisis gets a lot of time, gets a lot of attention. I'm a philanthropist now. I've been head of Ploughshares Fund for 12 years, so I know that the philanthropies, the foundations, donate about $1.5 billion every year to climate change. They give about 40 million to nuclear weapons work. So it's we're orders of magnitude off on the kind of resources that are being devoted to it. And climate change gets a lot of press. It's hard to pick up a paper these days where you don't see something about it. The president just announced, as soon as he was able to, that we in fact have left the Paris Climate Accord agreement this week. But you don't see that much news about nuclear weapons. That's because most people think that we solved this problem, that the Cold War ended decades ago. Well, the war ended, but the weapons remain. And we've made great progress in reducing the numbers of weapons, reducing the countries that have these weapons, but they're still here. They're buried under the Great Plains of America or on submarines patrolling the deep oceans of the world. You don't see them, but they're here, and the risks are very, very real. I want to quote something some of my colleagues wrote just this last month. This is former Secretary Ernie Moniz, former Secretary of Energy, who's one of the smartest men I know, and former Senator Sam Nunn, who's head of the Senate Armed Services Committee when I was working on the House Armed Services Committee staff. And they have this quote, the dynamic that's going on in the US-Russian relationship, clashing national interests, insufficient dialogue, eroding arms control structures, advancing military technologies, and new threats from cyberspace have destabilized the old equilibrium, creating a state of strategic instability, where an accident or mishap could trigger a catastrophic chain of events. All that is needed, they say, is a spark to light the tinder. So what are they talking about? What do they mean? I mean, yes, we see Iran, we see North Korea, but the tinder? So let me outline it for you. Let me tell you what they're talking about. And the way I see it, there's 5 large threats. I've been doing this work for a very long time. You'll see in some of my books out there that I do almost an encyclopedic review of the threats around the world. I used to do it in volumes, I used to do it in conferences, now I do it in end-of-the-year articles, but here are the 5 current threats that I think you have to worry about, and we'll go into some detail about them. And I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A so that you get to ask me the questions you're most concerned about. So take notes. I'm going to hit some topics, you note them down and go, let's go back to that. Number 1. The number 1 threat we face, the number 1 problem we have is not something that a lot of people talk about, but it's happening, is that we're in a new nuclear arms race. There was a nuclear arms race for most of the Cold War. I think you could say that starting with Ronald Reagan, we started to slow that race down. We started to unrace. We went from a peak of about 70,000 nuclear weapons in the world in the mid-1980s. US and Russia had about 95% of them. So we each had about 34,000 nuclear weapons each. Ronald Reagan turned that around. He was the first president that negotiated treaties that started reducing these weapons, not just limiting them. And since then, we've climbed down because of Reagan, George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, all of them, Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives, followed the same strategy. We don't need these weapons anymore. Let's move steadily towards getting rid of them, and we're down to about just under 14,000 in the world today. 14,000 nuclear weapons. Now that's an enormous number of nuclear weapons, and most of these are still held by the United States and Russia. We hold about 91% of the global arsenals. And these are big weapons. These are hydrogen bombs. So we destroyed the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki with atomic bombs. Each one had a yield of about 15,000 tons of TNT, 15,000 tons. Now that is an enormous yield. That is an enormous destructive force. It would take hundreds of conventional bombs, hundreds of bombers carrying thousands of conventional bombs to do that kind of damage, 15,000 tons. And we, with Hiroshima, 1 plane, 1 city. The citizens of Hiroshima, when they saw the Enola Gay flying over them, weren't worried, because what could 1 bomber do? And that's what happened on that fateful day 74 years ago. We changed the nature of warfare. We changed a new type of weapon. We had mastered the elements of the universe. We could actually split the atom, and it released an enormous kind of force. So that's what the old weapons were. Now we have hydrogen bombs. Starting in 1953, the US and then Russia quickly developed hydrogen bombs. These do not split the atoms, they fuse them together. And fusion is the basic energy force of the universe. This is what the sun does. And we pathetic human beings are actually able to duplicate the core energy in the universe. And we're able to, all stars, the sun being one of them, are powered by this force. We can do it here on Earth. We use an atomic bomb to give the energy, the heat, the radiation, the pressure, to fuse elements of hydrogen together. That's why they call it a hydrogen bomb, the basic element of nature. You fuse it together, and that releases even more energy. So the kind of bombs we now have that are deployed on our subs and missiles and airplanes are these thermonuclear bombs, fusion bombs, hydrogen bombs, and they range from somewhere around 10 times the bombs in Hiroshima to 30 or 40 times the size of the Hiroshima bombs, so each one. And that's what Russia has, and that's what Great Britain has, and that's what France has. India and Pakistan and Israel only have atomic bombs. China has hydrogen bombs, and North Korea has atomic bombs. But all those, of these 14,000 weapons that are in the world, US has about 6,000, a little more of them. Russia has about 6,000. The rest of the countries have a couple of hundred each. 9 countries all told. The problem is that we've stopped reducing. We are no longer going down. We flatlined. And every single one of those 9 nuclear countries is now building new weapons. Some are expanding their arsenals. North Korea, India, Pakistan. Some are replacing weapons that wear out. Nuclear weapons delivery systems are like cars. They wear out eventually. You have to replace them. So we're now replacing the bombers and subs and intercontinental ballistic missiles that were built in the Carter and Reagan administration. And the Russians are replacing the ones that were built in the Brezhnev era. They're wearing out, they're building new ones. The cost is enormous. We expect that all these countries will spend about $1 trillion this decade on new nuclear weapons. The US alone is going to spend almost $2 trillion over the next 25 years. So we are going to pay, US taxpayers, almost $2 trillion for a whole new generation of nuclear weapons that will be with us another 30 or 40 years. Every one we have now, retired, replaced with a brand new one. And countries are building new kinds of weapons. You may have seen Vladimir Putin bragging about these hypervelocity weapons, or a nuclear-powered cruise missile, or an underwater nuclear-powered drone that could travel under the oceans, all designed to circumvent a US missile defense if we ever figure out how to build an effective one. The US is also developing new kinds of nuclear weapons, not these very strange weapons that Putin's playing around with, but there's a push this year. In fact, one of the debates in the Defense Authorization Bill, the bill that funds the Pentagon, that funds all the military, that is now in conference between the House and the Senate, one of the key divisions that is delaying that agreement is a provision that was passed by the House to block funding for a new weapon that President Trump wants, a so-called low-yield weapon. The theory is that because we all have hydrogen bombs, we are hesitant to use them, that they're too big. As they say, we're self-deterred. So in order to make them more usable, in order to make military commanders or presidents more willing to use a nuclear weapon, we need a smaller bomb. We have to go back to the atomic bomb, and that's exactly what they're doing. Inside every big bomb is a little bomb. As I said, you use the atomic bomb to fuse the hydrogen. Well, you can just take the hydrogen out, and you can leave the missile with just the atomic bomb. And that's what the contractors and the Navy want to do now. Take some of the submarine-launched ballistic missiles and put little warheads on them. So we can use our subs to fire a small nuclear weapon, which commanders and presidents might actually use. And there's a whole theory that goes along with this that says we can use a nuclear weapon at a small level, and that will end the conflict. That will convince our opponent that we are very, very serious and they better not proceed, whether that opponent is Iran, that doesn't have nuclear weapons, or Russia or China that do. That new kind of weapon, these new doctrines that are being developed, is one of the things that Moniz and Nunn are talking about, these new theories, this new race. It's underway. And as part of this new race, the countries are tearing down the guardrails that used to be there. The arms control treaties that were negotiated since the beginning. Since the beginning of the atomic age, presidents and other world leaders have seen that this was a threat to human civilization. That this, as Einstein said, changed everything except our way of thinking. And we had to adjust to this new reality. We had to adjust that we now have the power to kill our species, that we could do this in an afternoon. And so you had to have some kind of restraints. The very first resolution introduced into the United Nations was introduced by President Harry Truman, and it was UN Resolution number 1, and it was to abolish nuclear weapons. And we offered at the time to get rid of the handful of weapons we had. We were the only ones that had them, and place them under international control if everybody would agree not to develop them. Russia would not agree. Stalin said at the time, he told his scientists, that Hiroshima has broken the equilibrium, has broken the balance. Build me the bomb. Ask for whatever you need, you will be given it. And so Stalin raced to build his own bomb. He got one in 1949, and the arms race was on. That we went quickly from atomic to hydrogen, from a few dozen to thousands. By the time John F. Kennedy was inaugurated, we had 20,000 nuclear bombs. 20,000 nuclear bombs. We built them for every conceivable mission. It was the thing to do. It was the weapon of the future. So we needed not just bombs on big bombers that could cross the ocean, but we needed small weapons. We needed rockets with nuclear warheads on them. We needed nuclear depth charges, nuclear torpedoes. We needed, my favorite weapon was the nuclear bazooka. This was a two-person weapon, a small recoilless rifle that the Army could set up that would fire a small nuclear shell about a half a mile. Now, why anyone would want to fire a nuclear weapon a half a mile is beyond me. Even the Army figured that out. They stopped making it around 1962. But we fitted nuclear weapons for every conceivable mission. They were all over the place. That was part of the arms race then. That's the arms race we unwound, starting with Ronald Reagan, continuing with George H.W. Bush. Sometimes we did it by treaty, sometimes we did it unilaterally. George H.W. Bush eliminated 14,000 nuclear weapons from the Army and the Navy unilaterally. No treaty, no agreement, he just said we don't need them anymore. This was in 1991. The Cold War is over. He denuclearized the U.S. surface fleet. He denuclearized the U.S. Army. No more atomic cannons, no more atomic bazookas, no more depth charges, no more, etc. Took them all down. And the Russians did the same in a reciprocal gesture, Mikhail Gorbachev. But while all this was happening, there was always an element in the U.S. politic, in the U.S. military thinking that didn't like making agreements with our enemies, that didn't trust them. We can't trust our security to pieces of paper, they would say. And that element was always in the minority, and now it dominated U.S. security policy. It's epitomized by the rise of John Bolton to become National Security Advisor. This is a man who always hated these treaties and worked to undermine them whenever he had the chance, and he had the chance in spades as National Security Advisor. He convinced President Trump he didn't need that much convincing to pull out of the Iran anti-nuclear agreement. He convinced him to pull out of Ronald Reagan's Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement, the agreement that ended the nuclear arms race in Europe. Some of you may remember the demonstrations in the 1980s when the US and the Soviet Union were pouring new missiles into Europe to fight a European nuclear war. Reagan and Gorbachev ended that, destroyed all those weapons. Bolton didn't like it then, he didn't like it now, he convinced the US to pull out of it. And this is just a prelude to the end of, most likely the end of the last remaining agreement limiting US and Russian strategic arms, the so-called START Treaty. Again, this is a Reagan legacy. He started the START Treaty, he couldn't finish it. George H.W. Bush did, and then did another one, START 2, that Bill Clinton then finished, never got ratified, but the terms were the same, and this is what led to that decrease. Obama did a small amendment to it. The new START Treaty dropped him even further. Bolton never liked it. This was an Obama treaty, so it was easy to convince President Trump that it was not worth it. It was a flawed treaty. This treaty is set to expire in February 2021. If that goes, it'll be the first time since 1972 that strategic arms have not been controlled in some way. So this is what we're talking about when we're talking about an arms race. The elimination of the guardrails, the new weapons that are coming in, the possibility that the ceiling will be taken away, and you could build as many as you want, as long as you want it back, but return to the nuclear arms race. There's more to say about that, but we'll leave it for Q&A. That's just threat number one. Threat number two is that this goes on not just between the US and Russia, not just sort of abstractly with other countries building weapons, but there are regional conflicts that have regional arms races. Chief among them is in South Asia. This is probably the area of the world where most experts have expected to see a nuclear weapon used again in combat. And that's because India and Pakistan both have about 150 nuclear weapons in their arsenals. They both tested in 1998, and they've been building up ever since. Pakistan is probably building nuclear weapons faster than any other country on Earth. These two countries share a border, which has been contentious since independence, since Britain pulled out, and Pakistan and India formed two independent countries at the end of the 1940s. There is active armed conflict on this border. There was just a few weeks ago a half dozen soldiers killed on the so-called line of control in Kashmir. They have fought 4 wars during this period, including one, the Kargil conflict, when they both had nuclear weapons. It was the smallest of the world wars. It was contained, so the great powers moved in quickly to try to calm that down. And they both have fundamentalist nationalist forces in their country urging them on to a final solution. You heard the president of Pakistan, Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Khan, twice in the last few months, including at the United Nations, threatened nuclear war against India because of what the fundamentalist nationalist president of India, Mr. Modi, is doing, which is imposing a new solution over Kashmir, violating the pledges that India made when it was formed, and actually occupying Kashmir, locking it down, trying to impose a form of Hindu nationalism on what is has a Hindu-Muslim state, the largest Muslim population in India. Jonathan was kind enough to mention my podcast, Press the Button. This week we have a Princeton physicist, Dr. Zia Mian, on, and he's talking in depth about this problem. And he warns that sooner or later this occupation that has basically cut off Kashmir from the outside world, that has shut down the internet, that has troops patrolling the streets of the largest cities, that has isolated Kashmir, controlled traffic in and out, that eventually this will have to lift. And when it does, you're going to see demonstrations. And when it does, you're going to see protests, and when it does, you're probably going to see those Hindu nationalist forces that egged Mr. Modi and his BJP party on to go back in greater force. So this is the kind of spark Nunn and Moniz are talking about. This is the kind of thing that could flash out of control. I spent pretty much all my professional life in Washington. I went down to Georgetown University to go to graduate school, and I never left. I just worked from one job after another there. And I've been participating in a lot of war games, and every war game that I know of that involves a conflict in South Asia since 1988 goes nuclear. There is no clear fire break. There is no logical place to stop. Even though there are theories that say, well, the other side will recognize that this is going too far and that we will use our nuclear weapons, even though there are those theories. In practice, when you start to play this out, or as you model it, the closest thing we can come to practice, there's always the assumptions always prove to be wrong. One side goes too far and the other side says, okay, I will use one nuclear weapon, the other has to retaliate, and it just shoots up the escalatory ladder just like that. There's no clear fire break once you go. As George Shultz testified about the small nuclear weapon, he says there's no such thing as a small nuclear weapon. Once you use a nuclear weapon, you're crossing the line. You're crossing the line. We haven't crossed that line in 74 years, but we are getting closer now. Not just with our policies, but other countries' policies as well. So that's threat number 2. Threat number 3 has got to be North Korea. Because here comes North Korea. For years we had policies, we had efforts that saw what they were doing and contained it, slowed it down, reached partial agreements to slow them down. During the Clinton administration, they had something called the Agreed Framework. It was a short document, a 3-page document, that froze North Korea's plutonium program, the stuff of bombs, the fuel that you can use for nuclear weapons, froze it for 8 years. And in return, we were supposed to deliver various kinds of economic and technical assistance. We did not deliver that technical assistance, in part because Congress cut the funding off for it. And by technical assistance, economic aid, I mean fuel oil. The North Koreans had said they were developing this technology, this plutonium, for fuel, for reactors. So we said, don't build the reactors, we'll give you oil to power your generators. Again, it ran into this clash in the Congress, then Republican-controlled, that said we don't want to give concessions to our enemies. We want to squeeze them until they collapse. And so the aid was cut off, the North Koreans reacted, the deal frayed, eventually it was killed. John Bolton helped kill it. and the North Koreans started up their program again. The deal collapsed in 2003. In 2006, they tested a nuclear weapon during the administration of George W. Bush. And they've conducted 6 tests since then. We believe that they have perfected the technology, they perfected the art, they know how to build a nuclear weapon. The last test, we believe, was a hydrogen bomb test. It was underground, but it went off at a very large size. The gases we detected in the atmosphere afterwards are consistent with the fusion device. And they also started developing ballistic missiles with very long ranges. This had taken them some time. We worried about these things in the 80s, but 2 years ago they did 2 tests of some very sophisticated long-range weapons that could hit, theoretically at least, any part of North America. Anything from Alaska down to Cuba, these things can hit. So we don't know for sure that a normal nation would have more tests, both nuclear and missiles, but they've demonstrated the technologies that I feel safe in saying that the North Koreans have a rudimentary ability to hit the United States with a thermonuclear device. Several, in fact. So this is a new threat that has emerged just over the last few years. One of the promises of the Trump administration, one of the things where I supported the President of the United States in his efforts, as you can tell from my remarks so far, I'm critical of many parts of what the Trump administration did. But one thing that I approved of was, and applauded and tried to assist, was the diplomacy with North Korea. It's a tough thing to do, to have diplomacies with evil men. But that is what we do all the time. Those are the kinds of agreements we try to reach to contain the danger, to contain the evil. And when he met with Kim Jong-un, he shattered a norm that had existed in Washington for a long time. The idea was that we would negotiate agreements with North Korea at higher and higher levels. We got as far as the Secretary of State, one of my mentors, Madeleine Albright, flew to Pyongyang, you may remember, at the very, very end of the Clinton administration, when we had this freeze in place to try to turn the freeze into something permanent. She also negotiated a freeze on missile testing, and the idea was maybe if President Clinton came at that point, or what they thought would be President Gore would come at that point, that would seal the deal. So the visit by the president would be the reward for concluding the agreement. And part of that restraint, part of the agreement on ending North Korea's nuclear program, would also include us signing a peace treaty. There is no peace treaty between the United States and North Korea. The Korean War never ended, technically. We're in a state of armistice. We stopped fighting in '53, we signed an armistice, there were supposed to be elections, there was supposed to be a peace, none of that happened. The temporary line that we drew became the DMZ between North and South, 1953. The idea was that those big rewards, presidential visit, peace treaty, would come after a nuclear agreement. President Trump turned that on its head. He gave the reward up front. And as it turned out, that was a pretty smart thing to do. That brought Kim Jong-un out. Kim Jong-un started making substantial offers on the nuclear front. But again, it ran into this clash with this view that we don't want to make concessions to our enemies. So we don't want a partial deal. Again, the advisors he had, including John Bolton, who went with him to Hanoi, we don't want to have a deal that is like what Clinton did with North Korea, or like what Obama did with Iran. We want a deal that has North Korea give up everything first, and then we will do some things. We will start relieving sanctions. Then we'll talk about a peace treaty. Isn't it enough that I, the President of the United States, have got to visit you and conveyed this great legitimacy on you? But it wasn't enough for North Korea. They're not idiots. Whatever you think of their oppressive and vile regime, they saw what we did to Saddam Hussein. They saw the deal that we made with Gaddafi and then killed him. They saw the deal we made with Iran and then broke it. So they didn't want anything to do with partial agreement, or with an agreement that said they would do everything up front. They thought we were going to play them for suckers. That's not an unfair judgment. That is a pretty good judgment on their part. I think President Trump would like to make an agreement. I think he would like to make a deal. It's one of two places in the world, the other being Iran, where he might be able to get a foreign policy victory before too long. I think his problem now is that he doesn't have a team that's competent enough to do it, that's competent enough to put this together in the time that he has left. For a good part of this administration, they've been cutting the State Department. They've seen the State Department as part of the problem that we're spending, that this is where the deep state resides. So you want to purge these people, you want to get these people out, and that what matters is the White House, and we will run everything through the White House. Well, what that means is that all the diplomats who knew how to put deals like this together are no longer there, or are there in short supply. So could you get a North Korea deal? It's possible. I'm still holding out some hope, but it's going to be extremely difficult. And this gets us to the fourth problem, and that fourth problem is Iran. Now this is the fourth problem because Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. They don't have a bomb. Iran has played around with this technology for years. Part of my job when I was at the Carnegie Endowment, when I wrote this other book out there, Deadly Arsenals, was tracking the program. So I would track its history from the Shah, the time of the Shah. He was playing around with nuclear weapons. He thought if the big boys had bombs, he should get a bomb too. Many countries had that kind of idea in the 60s and 70s. He started a secret nuclear program. Because he was our guy, we okayed it. The Shah of Iran had a plan to build 20 nuclear reactors. We okayed that plan. The Shah of Iran wanted to do something that's called reprocessing, where you take the fuel of a reactor and you reprocess it, and you take away all the highly radioactive material, and you take away all the uranium, and you pull out the plutonium. Plutonium is made in reactors. Every reactor on Earth makes some amount of plutonium. Some reactors make more plutonium than others, and this is where we get it. This is how you do it. And he wanted to do that under the idea that this is what you needed to make this new kind of fuel, a plutonium-uranium mix of fuel. We okayed that during the Shah's time. Shah didn't last. 1979 changes everything. Originally, the mullahs in Iran ended the Shah's nuclear program. This is Western technology, said the Ayatollah. We don't want any part of it. But then Iraq attacked Iran. Shortly after the revolution, 1980, 81, they attack Iran, and Iran is left on its own. Iraq starts using chemical weapons against Iran. And the US vetoes a resolution in the Security Council condemning the use of those chemical weapons. We were siding with Iraq against Iran. That's when the Iran regime decided to dust off those nuclear weapons plan. That's when they restarted the nuclear program in secret. And there's no question in my mind that they were restarting it to build a weapon. The Iraq war after 8 years, the Iraq-Iran war after 8 years ends. 1 million Iranians are killed, but it ends. Shortly thereafter, after that war ends, in 2003, the US invades Iraq. And in 2003, we defeat the 5th largest army in the world, the Iraqi army, in about a week. This is the army that Iran had fought for 8 years to a standstill. 8 years, we knocked them off in a week. That's when we got Iran's attention again, and Iran decided that they wanted to start negotiating with the United States again. We had 250,000 troops in their region. According to US intelligence, the Iranians at that point ended their nuclear program. They disbanded the team that had been working on nuclear weapons designs, and we know this with a high degree of certainty now, and they broke up the teams, and they kept it going at a very, very low level, basically working on fuel and construction of a power reactor. But all this took a very long time. They wanted to make a deal, but we weren't interested in making a deal with them at that point. The Europeans started negotiating with them in 2003, but the Iranians always wanted us to come to the table. The Europeans could give Iran economic benefits, but not the security benefits that they wanted. Again, it was a clash of policies. The George W. Bush administration at that point had a policy that was summed up by Vice President Cheney. We don't negotiate with evil, he said, we defeat it. And that was the idea. We were going to roll through the Middle East. We were going to take down one offensive regime after another and replace it with pro-American regimes that would secure American security interests in the region for generations to come. That didn't work out. That was, many people believe, the greatest strategic blunder in U.S. military history. We're still dealing with the chaos of that decision, of that failed national security policy. So when Barack Obama comes in, he's trying to clean up part of this mess, and part of that mess is he wants to pick up the negotiations with Iran. And after a year or so, some secret contacts, direct contacts between the U.S. and Iran are established, not diplomatic recognition, but in 2013, the Secretary of State, then John Kerry, meets with the foreign minister of Iran. That was the first time that the U.S. Secretary of State had met with the foreign minister of the Islamic Republic. And and the Europeans, which have already been engaged in these talks all along, now form the talks in a bigger circle. Russia's invited in, China's invited in, and we have these European Union, France, Germany, Russia, China, us, and after a good year and a half of negotiating, we developed what I think of as the strongest non-proliferation agreement ever reached, the Iran nuclear accord, known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. These guys need some Hollywood writers to give them better titles for this stuff, but it's called the JCPOA. This thing works. This thing works. Iran rolls back its program, freezes it, and puts it under a microscope, the toughest inspection regime ever created. There are no flaws in this agreement. This is not a weak agreement. This is not a mistaken agreement. The only flaw in this agreement is we didn't have photos. So you never saw the photos of the Iranians ripping out 13,000 centrifuges out of their facilities and putting them into storage. You never saw them pull out the core of their plutonium production reactor, drill it full of holes, and fill it with concrete. You never saw the IAEA inspectors coming in to all their facilities and putting state-of-the-art radio frequency fiber optic seals on doors, on barrels, on storages, so that if anyone breaks those seals, they would know it in Vienna instantly. You never saw that. You didn't see it because the Iranians didn't want you to see it. It was embarrassing that they were giving up this program. They were making these kinds of concessions. So why were they doing it? Because they wanted to re-enter the U.S. Western economic system. They need Western assistance, U.S. and European, and Russian and Chinese, to rebuild their economy. And so that was the deal. They were willing to give up this program, which had risks associated with it anyway. Did Iran really want a nuclear bomb? I've talked with many Iranian officials and they say, no, that'd be crazy. Why would we develop a nuclear bomb? If we develop a nuclear bomb, what do you think our neighbors are going to do? Which is the kind of logic that most countries in the world have. Most countries in the world do not have nuclear weapons because they believe they're safer in neighborhoods and continents and regions where no one has nuclear weapons than when there's an arms race. They see what went on between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. They remember the fear of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. They see what's happening in South Asia. They don't want any part of it. And Iran may have that calculation. But Iran is a complicated country. There are factions. I think there are some people in Iran who would like to get a nuclear weapon. Iran is a lot more like a normal country than you would think, despite its abnormal regime. It's got intense politics, intense factional fights. When we pulled out of that regime, we then started to lift the lid. The Europeans have been working frantically to keep the lid on. Now remember, we pulled out. The deal still exists. The deal is this, there is no withdrawal clause to this deal. We just stopped complying with it. We're technically in violation of the deal because we reimposed all the sanctions that we had just lifted. So Iran never got the economic benefits it was promised. It destroyed all this equipment. It shipped out all the uranium gas they had built. It did everything it was supposed to do, and again, the Americans reneged on their part of the bargain. I'm not saying this to justify the regime in Iran. I'm with the majority of Iranians. I would like to see this regime go. I'm just explaining the dynamic that's going on here and why they're doing what they're doing now. So when you see the story that was in yesterday's paper, that the Iranians are starting to violate parts of the agreement, this is why they're doing it. The Europeans have been trying to keep the deal together, trying to find a mechanism to give Iran the economic benefits that were promised. But they can't, because we are the most powerful nation in the world. Not just militarily, not just on streaming videos or Hollywood films, but economically we are the world's powerhouse. We dominate still the world's economy. And when we sanction Iran, we don't actually sanction Iran. There's some. We put restrictions just the other day on a few of the close top officials to Ayatollah Khamenei. But mainly we sanction our allies. We don't do any business with Iran. We haven't done business with Iran for decades. What we do is we sanction people who are doing business with Iran. The Japanese, the Chinese, the Russians, the Europeans, the people who are trading. And we say, if you make that deal, if your bank gives them a loan, we will cut off your bank from the US financial system. Well, it's no contest. I mean, it's no contest. You can buy oil from lots of people. And after that, you're talking about cashews, pistachios, and carpets. Those are the top 3 exports of Iran. Hydrocarbons, number 1, and then pistachios and carpets. The Italians, for example, buy a lot of pistachios from Iran. Or did. And if for a European company, for a European bank, it's no contest. You get, yes, millions of dollars of profits from Iran. You get billions by doing business with the US. And so we are effectively imposing our foreign policy on them. They don't want to do this. They like the deal. This was the great achievement of European diplomacy. They've been negotiating since 2003. They finally get it, and then the Americans take it away. So, the Iranians are basically turning the rheostat. Nothing that they've done in the past, I think it's like 6 months since they started doing this, brings them materially closer to being able to build a bomb. They're still, because of this deal, a good year away. If they just went out in a full sprint, if they pulled all the plugs out, if they broke all the limitations and just ran as fast as they could, it will still take them a good year to make the material for one bomb. To turn those centrifuges that they have left that are allowed, about 3,000 or so that are operating, to put new cascades in and have them go full blast. It would take them a year to make the material for one bomb, plus another year or so to actually build it and destroy it. This is why this is the 4th ranking threat. But what they're doing is slowly saying there's a price to pay. We're not going to stay in this deal indefinitely without the rewards. So they've started adding new centrifuges. They've started putting it with something that was limited under the deal, new advanced centrifuges. The centrifuges they have are basically 1970s technology. They're not very good. Well, they're making ones that are more like the 21st century technology, things that are 10 times, 20 times, maybe 30 times better than those ones that they have operating. And what they did this week is they put a couple of new cascades of those in a facility at what they call Fordo, a deep buried underground facility, and they said they're going to soon start putting enriched uranium gas in there to start testing them. Again, nothing dramatic. It takes a very long time to turn uranium gas into the core of a bomb. It takes tens of thousands of centrifuges. They still only have 500, but they're starting to move. And that's what they're going to do, keep ratcheting it up. So most of the Democratic presidential candidates have pledged that they will rejoin the deal if they're elected president. The more the Iranians advance, the tougher it's going to get the Iranians to walk back. Everything they're doing is reversible, but it requires an act of will, it requires an agreement, it requires a judgment by the Iranians that says, okay, this time we can trust the Americans. I don't know. Okay, and here's the final one. And this is the one that's probably the most controversial, so I waited to the very end of my speech. And the 5th threat we face is the President of the United States. And I don't say that because I didn't vote for him, which I didn't. I hope he makes a deal with North Korea. I still hope he wants to make a deal with Iran. I know this. I've talked to their people. I've talked to people who talk to their people. He still wants to achieve a diplomatic victory. Again, I think it's a question of competence and whether the Iranians will make the calculation that there's a deal that they could possibly think would last. And there's still a chance you'll see that. But what I worry about is this combination of three things. One is the policies are continuing to rip down the nuclear guardrails. Everything they're doing is pulling things down. I worked in the House for almost 10 years. Former Speaker of the House, Sam Rayburn, said that any jackass can kick down a barn. It takes a carpenter to build one. They've kicked down a lot of barns. They haven't built anything. Nothing. Now maybe there's some strategy out here, but basically this is the clash you've seen since the beginning of the nuclear age, whether you trust international agreements or you think it's a Hobbesian world and we're just going to go build up U.S. military might and we're going to fight it out. And yes, lives will be lost, and yes, it'll be ugly, but in the end we will win. That is the clash that's going on right now. And so what you're worried about as you tear these things down, you're making it more and more risky. You're turning off the smoke alarms. They want to pull out of the Open Skies Agreement. This is the most benign arms control agreement you can imagine. This was Eisenhower's idea. He couldn't quite get it done. George H.W. Bush got it done when the Soviet Union collapsed. That we allow unarmed surveillance flights over each other's territory. There are 34 nations now in this so-called open skies. Why? Because you want to eliminate uncertainty. You want to let people see whether you're massing troops in this region or not, whether there's some deployments or not. Now, satellites can do some of that, but the technology in these planes, it's not just photo, it's sensors, not just cameras, but sensors, can tell you a lot more. There have been 1,500 such surveillance flights. We've flown 500 of them. The Europeans love this. It's particularly important for them. The U.S. wants to pull out. Again, this is John Bolton. He's gone from office, but he left a memo behind telling the president he should sign it. The president signed it. We'll see if they actually pull out. So you're worried about the policies that have made every nuclear danger this president inherited worse. You're worried that as the impeachment crisis intensifies, there could be a tendency to wag the dog. This is a common tactic of political leaders in trouble. They try to rally the public around them by engaging in a foreign conflict or by raising the specter of a foreign foe that requires the nation to rally around them and their leadership in order to defeat this common foe. And you have to be worried about the president's ability to launch nuclear weapons at any time he wants for whatever reason he wants. People do not believe me when I say this. The president has the ability to launch a nuclear weapon whenever he wants, for whatever reason he wants, and no one can stop him. No one can stop him. You would have to physically, illegally stop the president from doing this to do this. You've all seen the movies and read maybe the history of false alarms. And we've had a lot of them. My friend Eric Schlosser wrote the book on it, Command and Control. He lives up in Sundance. Read Command and Control. Watch the PBS American Experience show on Command and Control. We have had dozens of false alarms in multiple countries where we thought we were under attack, where the military calls up the National Security Advisor, the Secretary of Defense. I've talked to Bill Perry, one of my advisors, about the time he was woken up, told we were under attack, thought about whether he should wake up his wife or not, or let her sleep through it, end it that way. Only to find out at the last minute, no, it was a mistake, it was a faulty switch, it was a training tape put into the radar, into the system that indicated that we were under attack, we weren't. Or in the case of Boris Yeltsin in 1995, he was told by the Russian military we were under attack. They came into his office and they opened up the nuclear football. They have one too. We have one, they have one. The nuclear football that allows the President of the United States to get directly in touch with the military commander and give the code. He was told we were under attack because they had picked up what they thought was a US-launched strategic ballistic missile coming out of the Barents Sea. It was a Norwegian weather rocket. The Norwegians had told them about the flight. It had never gone up the chain of command. Their early warning satellites are poor and deteriorating. They thought they were under a nuclear attack. Fortunately for us that day, Boris Yeltsin wasn't drunk. He didn't believe his friend Bill Clinton would do this to him. He closed up. What would Putin do? What would Trump do? Or Modi? Or Khan? What would they do? But it goes the other way. It's not just the military can wake up the president can wake up the military. This is why there is a military officer assigned 24/7 to be no more than 1 minute away from the president at all times. He's that officer you see carrying that big suitcase, the nuclear football. Maybe you saw him at Mar-a-Lago early in the administration. People were taking pictures with him. When the president gets in an elevator, he gets in the elevator with him. When the president's in a golf cart, he's in the golf cart behind him. When the president goes to sleep or tweets, he's outside the bedroom door, waiting. And the president can summon him at any time. And he opens it, and there's launch options. And the president can then take out his card. What? Did I say something wrong? He can then, all he needs to do is pick up the phone, give the order, verify it's the President of the United States, and the order gets implemented. Now, I bring this up, not because it came up last time we impeached a president. Or, I should say, 2 times ago, when we almost impeached a president, Richard Nixon. 46 years ago, the President of the United States was under the threat of a special prosecutor named Archibald Cox, who was investigating this third-rate burglary, Watergate. He was getting too close. Nixon wanted him fired. He told the Attorney General to fire him. The Attorney General, Elliot Richardson, refused. He resigned. He took the Deputy Attorney General, made him Attorney General, told him to fire Archibald Cox. William Ruckelshaus refused. He resigned. He got the next in command, the Solicitor General, made him acting Attorney General. He was... Yes! Give that man a cigar. Robert Bork. He was Robert Bork, and Robert Bork fired Archibald Cox. This was the Saturday Night Massacre, 46 years ago, last October. About a week or 2 later, the President of the United States was still upset about this, and he used the crisis that was then going on in the Middle East, the Yom Kippur War, to raise the nuclear threat level of the United States to DEFCON 3. That's 1 step away from nuclear war. Both of these instances severely worried Washington. Was the president in his right mind? Was he under control? What might he do? Things calmed down. A few months later, the Watergate hearings were being held. Things were starting to spiral up. The president was furious. How can they do this to me? I'm the president of the United States. He told a group of people visiting him, I can stand up, walk into my office, pick up the phone, and in 30 minutes, 70 million people would be dead. And that was a true statement. That's what he could do. It got worse and worse, and when they were on the eve of voting the articles of impeachment, remember, he was never impeached. The committee just voted the articles. The support for impeaching the president rose to 52%, about what it is now, and the president resigned. But he was drinking heavily. He was walking the halls of the White House, talking to pictures on the wall. This is well documented. And Jim Schlesinger, the Secretary of Defense, told the officers in the White House, if the president gives you an order, check with me first. Unconstitutional, illegal, shouldn't do that. Everybody was glad that he did. Who's the Jim Schlesinger now? Where's the cabinet official who would do that, who could do that? Most of you probably don't even know the name of the Secretary of Defense at this point. Esper. Mark Esper, close. Or the National Security Advisor. Or the Director of National Intelligence. Or the Secretary of Homeland Security. Trick question, there is no Homeland Security Secretary.
I haven't checked the news in the last 2 minutes.
The national security apparatus over the last couple of years has been torn down, whether by design or temperament. And so you don't have those normal guardrails in place. Not legal guardrails, not part of a system. The system is designed to give the president unitary control over nuclear weapons, to make a decision and have it implemented immediately. It's designed for rapidity and certainty. But we were always glad to have those adults in the room that they say. And that's what worries me now. Ruth Marcus said in the Washington Post that the impeachment crisis is about to enter a very dangerous phase. She has no idea how dangerous this could become. Has no idea. And that's why this threat worries me most of all. I hope it doesn't come to that. I hope we don't see that. I hope reason prevails. But if we get through this next 18 months, 15 months, we better take a real good look at our command and control system, because this current period of instability has uncovered the insanity of the underlying system. Why do we have it this way? Why on earth would we give one person the ability to destroy all of humankind? Why would we do that? There were bills in Congress, there were members working on it, there were campaign advisors now talking to the candidates about changing that system. If we get through these next 15 months, if another president is elected, whether it's a Democrat or another Republican, I hope to God that we take a real hard run at getting a more rational command and control system in the United States, so that if this ever happens to us again, we've built in permanent safeguards that don't depend on one or two officials, but depend on the rule of law, depend on safeguards that no one can remove. Thank you very much for listening to me tonight. When they told me I could talk till 8 o'clock, I didn't believe them. I said that was too long. It turns out I can do it.
Well, great. Joe, thank you. That was just what I expected. Very insightful. You've been doing this for a long time. I have a lot of knowledge about these issues. I actually want to come back. I'll start out with one question, then we'll open it up to the audience for further questions. But one is really on your last point. And that's, for me, I remember when I joined the FBI and was at the academy and stood up and got sworn in. And when we got sworn in, we took the oath of office. About 10 years later, I went back to the FBI Academy and actually taught law there for 5 years, and saw new agent groups come in once a month and get sworn in and take this oath. And I would ask them, well, why do you take the oath? And, well, because you told us to, right? And the more I would delve into that, then we start talking about it, and it's a constitutional requirement that all officials of both federal and state governments take an oath to support and defend the Constitution.
From all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Yeah, and that's my next point. I then say to them, okay, what is the oath to do? To defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And then I ask them, well, who are our foreign enemies? And it's pretty easy or quick for them to say, you know, terrorist groups or certain governments. And then I come back and focus on what are our domestic enemies. And that one, they'll talk sometimes about domestic terrorists or common criminals. But usually I'm trying to get to a point which may potentially be the biggest domestic enemy to the Constitution. And eventually they come around to, we may be, the government, ourselves. And so my whole point with them is that, look, you're taking the oath to support and defend the Constitution. So you, as an agent, need to understand the parameters, understand the checks and balances, the Fourth Amendment. Those things are in place for a reason. And so I guess to your last point here, you know, it seems to me a little unbelievable that there aren't more checks and balances in place for this very issue of one person being able to just make that decision. In your experience over these years, have there been moves to try and change that? Or
The moves, we're still living with weapons and doctrines developed during the Cold War, when we really thought that the only way to prevent a massive Soviet attack was for us to have a massive retaliatory strike ready to go. Now, I actually have issues with the whole issue of deterrence. Many religious leaders do. Pope Francis has spoken eloquently about how the immorality of nuclear weapons, that it's immoral to threaten other human beings with this kind of mass annihilation for any reason at all. They used to make a cutout for deterrence, for saying we have these weapons to deter, but they've changed that in recent years, and they said there's no, and many religious groups have come to similar conclusions. That these are, you cannot keep 14,000 nuclear weapons in fallible human hands indefinitely and not expect something terrible to happen. Something terrible will happen. So we have to get rid of these weapons. But the command and control system has never sort of recognized this fact. It's always been designed that if missiles fly, an ICBM can reach from Russia to here in 30 minutes. We will detect it about 2 minutes into launch. So you've got a handful of minutes to understand what its trajectory is, to calculate its targets, to get a consensus among the military command, to notify the civilian command of the United States, to wake up the president, get the president. The president has about 7 minutes to decide whether to launch a strike or not. That's why on my podcast, we do an early warning segment of the news and we time it for 7 minutes to illustrate how little time that is. And that was where the system was designed. So when you gave the order, it had to just go. You know, no debate after you give the order. Well, the world has changed. And was always dependent on the idea that the people involved would be rational, would be sane. I think that was a mistake. I think that's a mistake. And so over the last couple of years, one of the bills that was recently introduced by Representative Ted Lieu at the end in 2016, before the election, because he became concerned about this and it's time to modernize it, and he wanted to restore to Congress the right to declare war, which Article 2 gives to Congress. So it should include nuclear war too. So there are now 3 or 4 different solutions to this sole authority, to first use, as they call it, including one by the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Adam Smith, who wants to declare it that the policy of the United States will be to never use nuclear weapons first. So keep the retaliatory, but prevent any president from using one first. And then, therefore, if a president gave that order, it would be illegal, and as you know, the military is required to not obey an illegal order. And that helps you put that check in command. His bill is 1 sentence long. And he's the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, a 20-year veteran.
Let's open it up for questions. This gentleman up there.
Thank you very much. My name is George Cano. As a survivor of the first atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima, I was only less than a half a mile from the ground zero. I want to tell you number 6 threat. The biggest threat than any one of them that you mentioned. You know what that is in this country? Now the small group of scientists are trying to teach us that fallout radiation from the nuclear bombs are not as bad as we thought. A good example, they said, Tosh, I want you to be in the front of us. Tell each one of you that you survived the bomb. Even though I was only 8 100 meters from the center of the bomb. That is what's going on right now. They're teaching everybody that they could ever think of is to let them know the nuclear weapon is not as bad as we thought. They are brainwashing us. So this using a small bomb, they're saying, oh, it's not as bad as other nuclear weapon because radiation yield is very, very small. You know what? Nuclear weapon is a nuclear weapon. It doesn't matter how small it is. You do not realize how I suffered from the effect of the nuclear weapon. I survived, barely. I am the youngest survivor ever on this earth. I'm 74 and a half. Next year is going to be 75th anniversary of dropping the bomb on Hiroshima. How dare for them to talk about, oh, the radiation is not bad. Good example is you, Tosh. I want you to join us. I want you to go with us to all over the world to let them know the bomb is not bad. And you know what? I said, thank you, but no thank you.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, sir. I mean, there's no response I can give that would be adequate to what you've been through. But this is one of the other costs of nuclear weapon. It's the victims of nuclear weapons, and some of them are in Japan, and some of them are in the Marshall Islands doing the testing, and a lot of them are right here. Mary Dickinson and I were talking before about the downwinders, the people who were downwind from the test that we thought at the time, that were told at the time, would cause no harm, but they caused great harm. And this is the other thing that makes nuclear weapons unique. It's not just how much power is concentrated in one weapon, it's that it's the radiation that can have environmental effects and cause cancers for generations after exposure. It doesn't end with the blast, as you well know, sir. Thank you for your statement.
You mentioned at the outset of your remarks that you were an optimist. I'm wondering what you could tell us that would be optimistic.
There's several things that make me optimistic about this, and I got to tell you, one is the new class of Congress people that have come in. I've met a lot of them, and I'm so inspired by how good they are, and a little depressed about how young they are, but how good they are. The energy that they're devoting across the political spectrum, the National Security Dems, the Squad. You know, these people are so talented. They're coming in with such a desire, and I'm seeing out in the presidential campaign trail a desire to not just, return to normalcy, but to fix some of the structural problems that we have. But that's just but all of that, I think, is made possible by and pushed by what I see as the new civic awakening in this country. I grew up in the anti-war movement. You may remember and participated in the civil rights movement and the women's rights movement of the 60s and 70s, right? And then there was the anti-war, the anti-nuclear war movement, the nuclear freeze movement in the 80s, where 1 million people demonstrated in Central Park. It used to be the largest demonstration in U.S. history, mobilizing millions of people in Europe. Well, that's not the largest demonstration in human history anymore, in American history anymore. That was the Women's March in January 21st, 2017, where put 1.5 million people on the streets. I see this new surge of activism pushing new organizations coming to the fore just in the last two and a half years. And it's not all about Trump. It's not just anti-Trump. It's about the things that people see that have been wrong with this country that Republicans and Democrats have failed to fix. And they are demanding more and more dramatic change. Are we going to get all of what they're asking for? No, we're not, but I think we're going to get a lot. And I see it when I see people like Adam Smith be the head of the House Armed Services Committee, and he was just at our conference at Ploughshares Fund, had a nuclear policy briefing in Washington just 2 weeks ago, and he says we have to redo the nuclear posture. We're spending too much money on these weapons. We don't need all these weapons. He talks about scaling our force down from thousands to hundreds, talking about how China only has 300 nuclear weapons, and they deter us pretty well with 300 nuclear weapons. Why do we need 3,000? And as he talks like this, I see things like Ernie Moniz and Sam Nunn talk about this. I see a new consensus forming. So that's part of what makes me optimistic. Whenever I see movements like this, I've been through enough of them to know that they come and go. So I know that you can't count on it going like this, but this wave is still building. This wave is still coming. And I think we got another couple of years or so to make some fundamental change if we do our job right, if we link up the people like me, the sort of the thinkers, the analysts, with the policymakers and with these mass movements, that we can force our government to make a change if we get a chance to do it. So that's why I have that optimism.
Okay, 2 more questions.
Well, I really didn't think I could talk this long. I apologize for going on for so long.
You almost answered this question, but I need more.
Yeah.
We've been effectively excluded as citizens from the military, industrial,
Yeah.
congressional complex so far. But can you give us any hints of points of leverage that we could take as activists to affect it? Any changes, or to shine a light on where it needs to be shown?
Sure. There's several things that you can do that any individual can do. You know, when you first are aware that climate change is a real problem, and you realize that there's individual things you can do, change your light bulbs, right? I just bought a Tesla Model 3, which is a really cool car. You know, there's things you can do, but those are individual. Those don't substitute for structural change. You still need big structural change. And in nuclear, there's things you can do, but it's not an individual act. It's actually reaching out to your representatives and telling them what you want them to do. And I'm telling you, this works. I worked in the congressional offices for 9.5 years. They've listened to these letters and the phone calls and the emails. So number one is tell them what you want. Tell them that you want to spend less money on nuclear weapons. And I'm telling you, the Joint Chiefs are with you. The Joint Chiefs don't care that much about nuclear weapons. As long as the military budget is growing, then they'll spread this money around. But whenever it starts to contract, and I'm telling you, it's going to start contracting, we cannot afford the kinds of budgets we have right now. We're spending more money now than we spent during any war in U.S. history except World War II. Since the Korean War, Vietnam War, Cold War, we're now spending more on our military budgets than we were doing then. You cannot last with that. That's got to come down. And when it comes down, and the Joint Chiefs have to choose, they don't choose nukes. They choose the weapons they actually use. So tell your representatives that, Republicans or Democrats. Write letters to the editor. You know, write. And so I understand the Salt Lake Tribune just became a nonprofit paper, the first in the nation. You know, newspapers are dependent on their readers. Let them know. Bring this stuff up. I know we have lots of other things to do. I know you're not going to go to bed tomorrow thinking about nuclear weapons. Maybe tonight. You're not going to wake up. But in your portfolio of worries, in your portfolio of concerns, give a little bit of attention to this one. Because of all the threats we face, if we get this one wrong, nothing else matters. If we get this one wrong, nothing else matters. Give a little bit of time to this. There are lots of organizations out there that can do things, from young, new activist organizations like Beyond the Bomb to established organizations like the Arms Control Association. Give some of them your money. Give them some funding. That's what we do at Ploughshares Fund. We raise money from concerned citizens and we find the smartest people with the best ideas and give them the funds they need to do the work. So if any of you either have money or need money, see me later.
Okay, one last question. This lady in the back. Yep.
Well, thank you. And I feel a little bit bad because that was a positive note.
No, go ahead. This is a good subject.
Okay, with the threat of all your warnings that invariably end with South Asia devolving into nuclear war, I mean, like I said, I hate to end on this note, but what comes next? What do the next days and weeks look like in all those scenarios?
Okay. You see, it gets worse. So here's the problem, and I'll do this real quick because then we're out of time. India and Pakistan have about 150 nuclear weapons each, and they have doctrines where each side justifies using them first. India technically has a no first use policy, Pakistan does not. Pakistan feels that the Indian conventional army is so strong that if it comes to a clash between them, if India crosses into Pakistan territory, their doctrine is they would use nuclear weapons first. Indian general, and they would say, well, India won't respond because we're just using them on our territory. The Indians say, we will respond, and then we will have a final solution to the Pakistan problem. That's the way these guys talk. The problem, if they use just 50 each, 100 nuclear weapons, hundreds of millions of people will die in the densely populated metropolitan areas of South Asia. The economy, the global economy will go into a tailspin. You are just disrupting a huge part of the global market, right? Plus the panic that would ensue, the horror. We've never seen anything like this on Earth, what would happen in that war. But it gets worse. Because using the climate models that we now have, scientists have calculated, and there's a study that was just released a couple of weeks ago, that the burning cities would put enough smoke and particulates into the upper atmosphere, the stratosphere, above the winds, that it would cover the Earth in clouds for 2 to 3 years, dropping global temperatures about 2 or 3 degrees Celsius. You might think that's a good thing. But it's not. It would mean that about 40 to 50% of the food crops in the world would die for 2 or 3 years at least. That would result in a famine that would kill about 1 billion people. That would probably bring down human civilization. I don't know any country or institutions that could survive the kinds of migration, the kind of scramble that would occur into that. It's every post-apocalyptic movie you've seen, except the Earth isn't devastated. Our buildings would be fine. We wouldn't even know the war had happened except for the films we saw until it gets dark. Until it's cloudy all the time, until the temperatures drop and the famine starts. So that's why you have to worry about something that happens on the other side of the Earth, even if it doesn't hurt us. And so that new wrinkle is the new part. I'm not even sure it's in the war games, but that's the new part of what happens if there's a South Asian war. And right now we're looking at a war with 100 weapons. You go below that, no, probably not the kind of climate change I'm talking about, but as few as 100 would do it. And remember, the US and Russia have about 2,000 in our operational stockpiles.
Well, thank you. I'd like to thank everyone for coming. Before we hear from signing books.